So, all right, it's 5 after. We got a few folks here. Actually, does anybody have questions in general they want to talk about before we get started with the presentation? It doesn't have to be about the presentation topic either. Just anything you're trying to work on that you have questions about that you didn't ask in Slack for some reason, or you want to go into more into you like talking better than typing. Some people are like that. Anyone?
Hey, Nariman here.
Hey.
This is my first time joining in this meeting, and actually I started to work on ingesting data from G Suite Workspace. So I have a question if you have any use case related to this.
From G Suite?
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah. You have any example? Do we have any examples of that? I don't think there's anything in the doc specifically about that, but
yeah. I think
are you're on this? Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I think one of the ways to use the file beats maybe as the files they have, but it will be better if we could do it on the Cribl side rather than having another host, getting or importing and then exporting the logs. So, is there anything on the roadmap for the G Suite integration?
I don't know. Do you have any info about that?
I don't know if we have anything on the roadmap specifically for G Suite, but my understanding is a lot of the Google products, the logs and the juicy stuff that you want is all behind APIs. So basically, if you can find the API endpoints to collect your logs, we can build the collectors to go out, pull those logs into Logstream and eliminate the need for you to have to run something like the FileBeat G Suite module, and we can just do it directly from Logstream itself. So yeah, maybe a little bit of work to set up and find the specific, it's like setting your account ID and password and all of that. And then once you have the API endpoints, it's all JSON data. So we can change it, we can manipulate it, we can do the reduction, enrichment, whatever use cases are of interest to you. So yeah, today's presentation will definitely be of interest because I think it will show you how to set up the collectors and go that way. But yeah, we definitely do that. I don't know if the team
do we have a list of the endpoints published, and does that change a lot? Is that something worth documenting on our end?
No, I think it's a pretty static. It doesn't change much of the time, but yeah, that's the reason I joined today. I saw that it's closely related.
Well, that's what we want. We want people to learn from various examples. So yeah, definitely sounds like there's a way to do what you want to do. I'm not a big fan normally of documenting other people's documentation in our docs, and I have strong opinions about those things, having come from starting the Splunk docs team a long time ago. But yeah, if that's static, we might at least be able to link out to it and check that link periodically and make sure it's still okay.
Yeah, I just did some Googling while we were talking here, and this is the G Suite module for FileBeat, and I know using other people's documentation, but anyway, so we've got in here actually links to the specific API endpoints that we need to run the collectors. So this is what basically the FileBeat agent is doing. It's going out to these endpoints and just substituting the token. So on the Logstream side, yeah, just basically copy this over, put in your token, go run it. You may have to do some manipulation with the breaking process, but yeah, this is exactly how you would get the data that you're interested in.
Cool.
All the endpoints. Yeah, here we go. This is good stuff right here.
It's good they have it all in one place. That's nice. So Nariman, does that help, or you think you're going to be able to get started after? I expect watching this presentation will also be helpful.
Yeah, after watching, yes, of course.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Anybody else have any questions? I think that may have been the first time we've had someone ask a question that wasn't like right after the presentation kind of thing. But that's what this meeting is actually for. The office hours are for the people who attend. It's not just an excuse for SEs to give presentations. I'm sure they love that. But okay, and then I have one thing to ask about, and this is also for SE. So if you folks can take this back to your team, the support team is starting a project with the documentation team to fill out our error log documentation. So to that end, we're hoping for members of the community and all Cribl employees as well to provide information about errors that they experience while using Cribl. And it doesn't even, we're not just looking for Cribl errors, we're looking for third-party error packages errors that that you might see. So this information is described in more detail in the new error log channel, which is just error-log on the community Slack. And we have a couple people who have already joined. If you have questions about that, please let us know in there. But yeah, the goal is to collect error information and publish it over time so that it's easier for everyone to self-troubleshoot, for support to troubleshoot. And we'll talk about this a bit also at next week's user group meeting. So, and with that, I will turn things over to Brendan to get started.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. So today's presentation, we're going to be pretty high level on how to use the collectors inside Logstream, specifically for REST API endpoints. So I don't really have any prepared content. I was just literally going to show, here's our product and how we configure everything. So, stop me at any point if there's questions or anything like that. I'm happy to answer all of those items. So I'm going to share my screen here again. And so those of you that have worked with Logstream before, you'll be familiar with the collectors page here. And I just have this set up on my machine locally. So your instance may look different. This is a standalone. You might have this in distributed deployment, but looks relatively the same. On this page here, we can set up collectors and use the different collector types here, whether that's file system, going out to object storage, S3, blob, Google, using a scripted collector. We'll talk about that in a little bit here, or the REST API. So this is actually, when we talk about replay, this is where we come and configure that. So things like S3, for example, and going out and pulling that data back. So if we wanted to configure an S3 input, we could put all that information in here. What's nice about this is I can configure other collector types. So inside Logstream, we also have the ability to go pull from REST APIs. And from a design perspective, when we implemented this, we wanted to approach this from a crawl, walk, run perspective. So we're kind of in between the crawl and walk phase point for the REST collector. It has a lot of functionality in it, but there's corner cases where we run into some issues sometimes that we just haven't implemented the functionality so far. I'll be honest about that. Some folks are shy to say, our product does everything and it just works. No, we're still kind of in the phase here where we've got some enhancements that we can add into the product here. So I'm always interested in use cases and corner cases that we run into when setting this up. So, just raise those on. You say, hey, I'm trying the REST collector and it's not working correctly. Can you either help me with this, or we can open a ticket for that. But for the most part, the way that this works is we go through a discovery phase, and you can set this up to be none. Just go collect. Cool, that's great. You can give it a static list of items, and these items will be referenced with a variable ID. And you can then use that, whether it's in the URL itself, the headers, the parameters that you configure. So basically, if you have a list of items, we'll go run the collector multiple times for the items that you have in a discovery list. What's also nice is you could actually do almost like a pre-collect request. You could go out to another endpoint, pull some data. Maybe you have a dynamic setup where you need to gather some IDs before you actually do the collection of the data. We can handle that. Same thing with the JSON response. That's a very similar concept here where we can put this metadata inside here. This one's hard coding the result, for example, but maybe we can go dynamically retrieve it from an HTTP request. For probably 90+% of the use cases, none is going to be the typical discovery type, just because we want to go out and collect from the URL here. So what's nice is this URL is a JavaScript expression, so I can put in all kinds of variables or functions or formatting. I can make timestamps in here, whatever it needs to be to assemble the URL and go out to the collect URL. We can do a couple different methods here. Get's typically the most popular one, but you could use post, or you actually send a body to the endpoint too if you're posting data. There's a few more configuration items here. We have collect parameters, and these parameters become the query string at the end. So, you have example.com and then, query equals test, whatever. So if we wanted query equals test at the end of this URL, we could put query in here and we could put test. Let me make sure I do this right. GPS. So now we have example.com and we put query equals test inside the parameters. That will automatically be appended to the end of the collection URL here. Now, what's nice about the collection parameters is we actually will URL encode all of these variables and the values when they are appended to the collection URL. So you don't have to worry about encoding or making sure if there's any special characters that those get updated correctly. We handle that for you with the collection parameters. Now, if you put them in the URL, we'll use them literally as they're entered in there. So if you want to get away from, having it auto-encoded, you could then kind of work around that by putting them right into the URL. The collection headers are, again, similar to the parameters, except we're going to pass these as headers to the endpoint that you're collecting from. So things like authorization, bearer tokens. This is where you would enter a bearer token or something like that, where you're going out to the collection endpoint and pulling that data. So that's how you would handle that. Currently, we are, that item is in plain text. We're working on some enhancements to, have secret store where you can basically have that pulled dynamically and not have this in the config here. So that's coming soon. The last item here, and what we'll spend a little bit more time on, is pagination. And so this very much is in a crawl phase right now, I'll be honest. So we have some very basic options on the pagination. Really, it's do you want a string from the body response? And that's typically a JSON item, or do you want something from a header that's returned? And typically that's just a string inside the header. With that, basically we take this body attribute, and sometimes it's like link or something like that. We'll use that URL and we'll go to the next page and pull that data. Find how many pages we want as a maximum. 50 is the default. You could set this to 0 if you want to basically say, just run this indefinitely, continue to collect. Don't stop, just go. But typically recommend, at least setting a maximum here. That way, in case there is some kind of issue, you don't just continue to collect the same data over and over and over. The last item here in the configuration is authentication. So we can use either basic authentication, and this is just a username and password. So authorization basic, and then the base64 encoded username and password concatenated together with the colon. Or we can actually do similar to the discovery. We can actually use login, which will go out, post a username and password using a body. And then what we want to get back is a token. And so in this case, you see here the authorized expression. This is the bearer authorization token that gets added back to the response. And so in this case, we could say, token is the value that we want to use. There we go. Token is the value that we want to use once we get the login back. So every time we run this collector, we'll go out, we'll log in, we'll obtain that token, and then we'll use it for the collection phase of the REST collector here. So quite a few knobs and buttons and levers here for getting the configuration set up in terms of the REST collector. there's still some stuff that's missing. You know, we always want to hear, you know, what are you trying to do from a collection standpoint that isn't working right, or you know, we could do better and improve on. So yeah, just raise those in the feature request room, and happy to send those over to our developers to get those into the product.
Brendan, quick question for you.
Sure.
Is there any way, and maybe this might even be in a log file, is there any way to see like the full URL that gets generated from all of these various settings in some way?
Great question. Yes, there is. So let's hop over to the collector here itself. I'm going to refresh this page. So we've got two collectors here, just a basic, I'm going to go pull some JSON data. This is the near Earth orbit data from NASA. So you can see some planetary information here on this. So I thought it'd be neat REST API to use for the example here. So yeah, absolutely. What we can do to have some more information about what's going on in the background is there's an advanced settings section when we run the collector here. And by default, this log level is set to informational. But what I can do is I can choose debug. And when I run this collector, it's going to go, you see we've pulled back. Here's this JSON data. It looks very similar to, you know, what we'd see in the preview pane for building a pipeline. But now when I, you know, have issues or something's not working correctly, what I can do is go over to Job Inspector, and we can see the recent jobs that have run. In this case, this is the last ad hoc job that was run from our stats page. And when I open this up, you'll see some information regarding the statistics of the collection, you know, how long it took, how many events were collected, how many tasks, all the good stuff here. There's more information about discovery, the overall settings of the job itself. But what we're really interested in is this logs page. And so these are the logs that were generated when this collector was run itself. And this will be unique for each collector job. So when we enable debug, you can see we actually have a fully assembled URL in the debug logs itself for going out to basically that REST endpoint. And we'll get some additional information back along the lines of you know, internal log stream information as to the discovery, the pagination, the collection, etc. So yeah, if you're having issues with it's not working right, or I don't know what the end result is for this collector, you know, you can expand the collection URL into the JavaScript expression browser here, where, you know, if we add something into this URL, I'm just going to convert this into a string template and just play around with this so you can kind of see, you know, if I put a variable in here, test, it's going to give me undefined because it doesn't exist. So, you know, we can look and see what kind of that overall expression is. But if you're doing things like pagination, what is the next page? You can't see that just from the basic URL. So that's where the debug logs are going to come into play.
Awesome. Thanks, Brendan. That was good info.
Absolutely. Good question. Cool. So we've collected stats, and this is just a basic JSON endpoint. We get the data back. We can save the sample. We can route it to pipelines, etc. But now let's say I have paginated REST API endpoint. So in this case, I'm taking the same near Earth orbit data, but I want information about the planets, not just the overall, you know, what's in the database here. So I have a new endpoint for browse, and I can set this to basically have a page. This is like offset limit type functionality here. So I want a limit of 1. I want 1 result return per page, just so we can have an example of how this works in the demo here. You wouldn't do this in production. This would be much higher than that. And then we start with page 0. So I always want to start there. You'll notice I've set the pagination here to body attribute with a response attribute of next, maximum pages of 50. So we're leaving the default there. So I'm going to run this now, and I'm going to also enable debug. And when I click run, you'll notice it's going to go out and it's going to load. We've got pages and pages loading here. And it should stop in just a second. 750, done. Awesome. So you notice here we have our JSON object. We have information about the specific near Earth body. I guess this name is called Eros. A898PA is the official name here. So, we've got all of this JSON data that's been parsed and extracted. This would be whatever you're collecting from your REST endpoint here. All of this is configurable. But what I want to point out is when we look at the internal fields, we get a better sense of how the pagination works inside Logstream here. So what's of interest is this double_collectible field. And this collectible field is basically the job that's running. Each page that's collected inside Logstream is actually an individual job. So we're chaining these jobs together. So we get the first page, we actually get the header information or the body information for the next page, and we use that to create a new job. We clone the settings, but we change the URL that's used to collect the data. So in this case, we can see what was the page number that was used. If we look at our second event here, we should see, remember, our limit was set to 1. So we have 1 item per page. So we expect this page number to go up as we look at our results. 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So you get the point on that. But you can also see here is the information about the next page that was received and will be used from, actually, I'm sorry, this is the current page. So you can see next setting here. So all of that information is also available when that is pulled back from the REST endpoint. Now I'm actually going to clone this. I'm going to show this slightly different because I set this up with an event breaker here, and I'll come back to that in a second. Oops. Because I want to show what this looks like from a default perspective. So I've created a new collector here, and I'm going to run this again. Let's stop this. When I click show more, this is going to be a huge JSON blob, but I'm going to expand. Oops. Did we actually get, we got truncated. Oops. Let's set this to 5. Apparently we got truncated again. All right, back to 2. There we go. So now we have a proper JSON object here. But you can see each page, we have 2 items here. We have an array. So when our data is returned, we have links. Here's our next page. You can see that we have our page 1, size 2. This is what we're using to go and pull the data from the next page in the configuration. We also have the link to ourself. This is API specific, so you'll have to customize this for what you need. Now, you'll notice in the configuration that I didn't use links.next. This is an interesting part of how we handle the response attribute. I actually use next. So we will traverse through the JSON tree and find our first entry for next. So this is what's used. So basically find the field name that is used for next and use that inside the configuration here. So don't need to reference the full path, just reference the specific field that has the next link in it. So we'll go back here, say 1. There we go. So again, here's our links next. So reference just next as the name. And we have an array of items. So this event that's collected is actually 2 events, and we need to unroll this with a JSON unroll function. What's nice is we actually have built in the ability for the event breaker to do that for you. So just by default, we have the system default event breaker, and this is going to return the data from the entire page, just all of the JSON data that's there. Now what we can do is we can add a rule set to this, and I've created one specifically for the near Earth orbit data. I'm going to go to this event breaker so you can see this. And what I've done is I've created a rule here, and I've configured an event breaker type of JSON array. We have plenty of options in here for when it comes to breaking the data, whether the JSON events are new line delimited, each event is on its own line. That's not the case. Or maybe file header, or whatever makes sense for the specific data. But in this case, we have an array. And we want to break this array into individual events. So I can choose the JSON array event breaker type, and I can give this an array field. Remember, in our sample, we had near Earth objects was the specific field name that was the array. Put this in here, field name. And then I can also optionally tell this, do I want to automatically extract the JSON object? So I can use the JSON event breaker to unroll the events. And then if I want to, I can also enable the ability to extract those fields into the individual meta fields that would be for the event. And you can configure other items, the timestamp field, if that's actually an item in the array itself. You can, or in the events themselves, you can configure how, max event bytes. This is probably what we were getting hit with earlier with the event breaker. Any of the additional configuration here that needs to be done can be so. Check your event breaker rules when you're working with JSON arrays, unless you're getting data that's returned back individually from the web page. So this is how you would get that set up. So let's go back to our collector. We had the system default rule. So I'm going to go back here and I'm going to run this again, just for sake of the recording here. So we've got our array here. Let's now reconfigure our collector and add our near Earth orbit event breaker. I'm going to save this and I'm going to run this again. I want to capture, I'm just going to say 10, click run. So you notice this is a little bit different than what we had earlier. There's no array anymore. We now have the individual objects that were inside the near Earth objects array. So these are the individual planets and items. And so you can see here's our planet name that we're interested in, or any of that data. This data can now be sent as individual events into the routes and pipelines so that we can send it off to the destination. So if you wanted to collect the interplanetary data and send it to your logs or Elasticsearch or Splunk instance, then totally a good way of doing this.
Hey, Brendan.
Yes.
Question, I missed something. Where would you route that data to the pipelines? I see what you're doing there with collecting it. I didn't see where you associate it with
Yeah, so great question on that. So what we would do here is we're going to use the collector ID as part of the route configuration. So I don't have anything in here. So I'm going to say collector ID. Pass through. We're just going to call it dev null for now. Oops. Call it neo. So when you click the run button, we were just using the preview functionality. There's two other options here. There's discover and there's full run. So the preview, what specifically the preview does is just opens the capture window and gives you the results back. We don't do anything with that data. You could save it to a sample file. You could, just preview the specific data and just use it for your analysis. Now, let's say you're ready to actually collect this data and send it off to your system of analysis. What you could use is the discovery or full run functionality. You notice some of the options change here when I change this selector here. In the discovery mode, what this does by default is actually goes out, collects all of the data, but it doesn't return it and send it to the routes by default. What it does is says, I want to know how many events and what the size of those events are. Give me the statistics for that. You can optionally say, yes, go ahead and send it to the route if so. Full run is the option that you're interested in for when I'm ready, I want to send this data to the routes and pipelines. So in this case, I'm going to hit full run, and this is going to start the job that you can see right now. It's going to go out and collect the data. And when we go back to the routes, apparently I didn't do it right. Assuming that you did this correct, your collector will be set up in such a way, or the filter will be set up on the collector here to route the data through that specific route through the pipeline and to the destination. So let me just check something really quick on this. There we go. Let's try that. Let's give that a go. Collection equals neo original. Nope, apparently not either.
Classic.
Yeah. This is why you have everything prepared for the demo when you show up, not trying to do stuff on the fly. So that's okay. But yeah, Scott, you get the general idea of you would set this up with the appropriate filter to send the data over to the routes and pipelines when you're ready to forward that data on.
Yep, makes sense. Thanks.
Yep, and I'll find the specific syntax for this here. Cool. Are there any other questions on pagination and collectors and how we do some of this stuff inside Logstream here? I know we've covered quite a bit on REST. Are there other questions on other collector functionality?
Going once, going twice. Nariman, did you get some more context that you were looking for?
Yes, actually, I have a question. How do you guys, if let's say the logs are lagging and the lagging is not something, something is dynamic, you don't know, it could be few hours or days, how you can set up in that case?
So if the logs are lagging, it depends on how the REST endpoint supports data collection. So something that I did not mention in here is when the collector itself, the REST collector is scheduled, when you use the cron syntax here, we can set this up with either like a relative time range in such a way where, say, I want the last hour, maybe I want to snap this to the last hour or something like -1 hour at hour and then to the latest hour. So it would basically, it's 1:38 p.m. Central Time for me. So this would collect from noon to 1 p.m. Using this syntax here. So you could basically go back in time and have a rolling window. You could set this up to, let's say I want to run this at 5 after the hour, every hour. This cron syntax would do that. See here, it's going to run at 2:05, 3:05, 4:05, etc. So you could set this up in such a way where, I don't want to make it skippable. I want to make sure this runs every single time. And in this case, let's say if the workers are not able to talk to the master, this resume missed runs will let it basically reschedule those jobs that it wasn't able to run. So in this case here, when I set this up with scheduled, what will happen is it now has 2 additional parameters that I could use here, or it can go in the URL. And that's actually earliest and latest. And these variables are dynamically populated as the collector runs itself. The other thing to consider too is I'm going to click save. I'm going to run this. I'm going to run this in debug mode so we can see the output. But you'll notice, actually, stop. it should be in here in the internal fields. So I pull up the collectible here. Oops. I'll look at the logs. We should have the earliest and the latest. That's okay. So you can reference the earliest and the latest fields. I'm going to pull up the docs to highlight that. Ooh, we have new docs on REST functionality. That wasn't the page that I was expecting to come up.
MK is way ahead of you.
Yeah, he is. He published some good content on there. I think Harry wrote most of it, but yeah, thanks to MK to do that. Oh, here we go. Earliest and latest. So let me put this actually in the URL itself. Again, not guaranteed that this will actually work. Let's see here if we have information we were looking for. Let's go look at our job inspector. Yeah, so earliest and latest is undefined. That's why we're having issues earlier. So this may be more based on yeah, schedule collection jobs. So with that, what we can do is we can then stirf time to print this out into the format that you need for a specific time window or time range, etc. So that's all there. So
then question: if the HTTP returns the error or something like that, if the log is not available for that time, something like that. So is there any mechanism to rerun it?
Yep, exactly. So yeah, let's say if we have an issue with the endpoint for some reason, like for instance, the scheduled option here, so we can reschedule tasks that have non-fatal errors. So if we get things, let's say like 401 or 403 access denied, that's going to be considered a fatal error. We were not able to access that endpoint because we were denied that. Now, let's say we get something like 429, server is busy, or rate limit exceeded. We're going to say, that's a non-fatal error. I'm going to resume this job later. So based on the error code, if it's fatal or non-fatal, we're going to come back later and reschedule that job and run it again.
Okay. But is there any documentation for that?
Great question as to what those error codes are. I'm not sure off the top of my head. Yeah, docs just say non-fatal errors. So I'll take that as an enhancement request for MK to update the docs with some examples of obviously 200 is well known, just it works, cool. But yeah. Is 403 considered fatal or non-fatal? So yeah, we'll get some more codes on the page there. That way you have that for reference. Yeah, absolutely.
It's a good SE office hours when the SEs learn something too.
Yeah.
All right, are there any more questions or anything else someone wants to go over?
Yeah, this is Mahmoud.
Hey.
Hey, I'm wondering if we can use this collector for grabbing the logs from the file system without any agent. Is it possible? And
Yeah, so it's going to depend. It's going to depend on how this is set up. So let's say you have a single worker in this worker group here. You can set up a collector to go out and collect from the file system. You can give it the directory path to logs. You can give it specific extractors that you want from that path. It's just JavaScript expressions. You could then optionally recurse through the file system to go folder to folder, check the files in there.
Okay.
And then you can also enable destructive collection. And this is useful for, let's say, you have an application that writes a log file, closes it, and it's done with it. It doesn't need it again, but we don't want to continually index this file over and over and over. We can destructively collect. It warns you, are you really sure you want this? Yes. And in this case, it will delete the file after it collects it. So yes, you could use a collector like this to go pull the logs off of the file system. Now, this is not meant as a replacement for agent-based collection, something like FileBeat or Splunk Universal Forwarder on your endpoints. This is a job. Let's say you have multiple workers in a worker group. This file system really should be something like a shared network mount, something like NFS or some other technology, because this job will get distributed to different workers in the worker group. So it's not guaranteed that the same worker is going to run this job if it's scheduled. So the next collection cycle may be a different worker. So we would expect this file system to be consistent from worker to worker.
Right. So my idea is to provide some data to the developers, the sample data for flexibility, because usually the sample import capability, I tried some high volume of files, but it didn't collect all the data, just grab it to 1,700 something. So I need some more.
You're referring to the sample data here.
Yeah,
yeah. So there is there's a limitation. I remember this. Yeah. So in general settings, there's actually a limit. Where are you? Max sample size. Here we go. So max sample size by default is limited to 256 kilobytes. So the number that you gave me more than likely correlates to 256 KB, as your file was bigger than that. So you can change this to, I mean, whatever you want for the max sample size. I would try that and re-import your files again, and you won't experience the same issue that you're having right now.
All right, okay. Good to know that. This is great.
Yeah, it's something that's really hidden away, and we don't make mention of it on the import side. So yeah, you bet.
And maybe there's another limitation. One of my logs are very high volume, like the one row is pushing a tremendous XML file. So when I get from the Cribl, it breaks down in different events. So it should be in one event, but it's separated into the. So is there any configuration over there to row event size something?
Yeah, so ultimately it's going to depend on how that XML is formatted. How is that data being received by Logstream?
From the Splunk forwarder.
Okay, so it's a universal forwarder, and it's sending. Is it sending like an entire XML file as an event?
Yes.
Okay.
But the Cribl cannot decide it's a 1 event or 5 events.
So if that is universal forwarder, Yeah. So we can configure a custom event breaker here, and we can set that up with filters in such a way where, let's say you have this XML data. What we can do is we can set this with whatever custom event breaker you want. We'll try to apply these in order. So in the event breaker, go to knowledge event breaker rules. I can create a custom XML breaker, and I can give this a rule. And remember, we have filters in here too, so I can say source type is my XML event, and we're going to have the source type available to us already from the universal forwarder. So we will only apply this event breaker when the source type is set to the setting that you have here. You can customize how you want to break these events, probably regex, looking for /XML or whatever is the event breaker here.
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, then you can customize how those events are broken as they're received by the log stream itself. So more than likely just need to add a custom event breaker here for that specific data. If you want to provide me samples, I'm happy to work with you if you're on the community Slack with building that content.
Okay, all right. Good to know that, so I can dig into this function.
Awesome.
And you can always get more feedback and more help from the community Slack. So
yeah, I'm already following there. Thanks for your Cribl folks to helping me over the Slack. I have one just question sent over to Slack, but I want to ask if it's possible. So
sure.
Let's say I have one data, one row, but I want to apply reduce the data and also same data, the masking, the like say, and the PII data, remove the masking these data, but I want to keep in different pipelines because each pipeline has a lot of functions over there, and second one is the masking pipeline. So
sure.
How can I put these pipeline serially? What configuration should I put it over there?
Yep, let me pull this up here. So the way that we process events inside LogStream, there's a couple different options you could do. We don't necessarily support chaining pipelines the way that you think, I'm going to take one pipeline, pass it to another pipeline, pass it to another pipeline, etc. But what we can do here is we can apply, let's say, the masking pipeline as maybe a pre-processing pipeline or a post-processing pipeline. And so this would achieve the functionality of I'm saying chaining with air quotes, the chaining of this really being you're tying a pipeline to whether it's a source or a destination to do pre or post-processing of that data. And that's going to be whether, you want to pre-process it before it goes to the main routes and pipeline. So mask the data before it goes to the main routes, or mask it after, depending on how the data is extracted using your reduction pipeline inside the main route here. So I would probably look at, potentially using a post-processing pipeline because you've already done your reduction, and then as it's going out, the data is already transformed, and then you can apply that based on the data source or whatever that is to the specific fields that you need redacted.
Okay. All right.
cool. Anybody else? Oh, Mahmoud, you had another question?
Nope. So far, thank you.
All right, cool. Then I think we're good to go. We got about another 5 minutes, but you don't have to use up the whole hour. It's all good. Anybody else have anything they want to talk about? Last chance. Okay, thanks, folks. And thank you very much, Brendan. That was awesome. And I'm sure a lot of people will benefit from that, from the recording as well. And hope to see some of you next week at the user group meeting. Join our user group planning channel to find out about that. And see you then.
Thanks, everyone. See ya.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay,
Bye.
thank you, Brandon.
Thanks, everybody. Cheers. Bye.